All right, let's talk about something that sounds like it's straight out of a movie. Imagine a famous journalist, someone you see on TV, getting arrested not for some big scandal, but for just doing their job. Well, that's exactly what happened to Don Lemon. Today, we're going to break down a case that puts freedom of the press on a collision course with the federal government. And it all started at a protest.
So, the headline that dropped on a Thursday night in January 2026 was a real shocker. Don Lemon, a face we all know, was in federal custody. And the craziest part? It wasn't for some personal drama or anything like that. Nope, the government claimed it was because of his work as a journalist.
Okay, and this is where the story takes a really interesting turn. He wasn't charged with, trespassing or disorderly conduct, something you might expect. Oh no, the charges were federal, and they were serious. It really makes you ask, right? Where is the line for a reporter at a protest? So let's dig into what he was actually accused of.
All right, first up, let's just lay out the basic facts of the arrest itself.
So get this, Lemon gets picked up by federal agents in LA while he's there covering the Grammys of all things. But the protest he was covering, that happened almost 2 weeks before, and it was all the way in Minnesota. That detail is so important. It tells you this wasn't just some local cop making a heat-of-the-moment decision. This was planned. This was a federal operation.
So what was this protest that triggered such a massive federal response? Let's rewind a couple of weeks to St. Paul, Minnesota, at a place called City's Church.
Okay, so picture this. January 18th. Protesters go into City's Church and disrupt the service. Now, their beef wasn't really with the church itself. It was with one of the pastors who, it turns out, was also an official with ICE. The goal was pretty simple: disrupt business as usual. And right there in the middle of it all, Don Lemon, live streaming the whole thing. To anyone watching, it just looks like a journalist doing their job.
Okay, let's get into the real meat of this. What were the actual charges? Because this is where things get really specific and honestly pretty unusual for a case involving a protest.
Lemon got hit with a two-punch combo of federal charges. First, conspiracy to deprive others of their civil rights. And second, a violation of the FACE Act. And let's be super clear, these are not minor offenses. We're talking about serious federal charges that carry real weight.
So you're probably asking, what on earth is the FACE Act? Well, it was passed back in '94, and it stands for the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. It was originally designed to protect access to reproductive health clinics, but, and this is the key part, the law also protects access to places of worship. Basically, it makes it a federal crime to use force, threats, or to physically block people from practicing their religion.
And here it is. This is the absolute core of the whole legal battle. The DOJ's big piece of evidence for this conspiracy charge. They say Lemon filmed a planning meeting before the protest even happened. In their eyes, that made him part of the plot. But for journalists and press advocates, that's just called reporting. Covering a planning meeting is journalism 101. So the entire case really hangs on this one question. Was he a participant in a crime, or was he a reporter doing his job protected by the First Amendment?
So as you can imagine, these charges just ignited a massive debate. On one side, you've got the Department of Justice, and on the other, you have a whole army of press freedom advocates ready for a fight.
Right out of the gate, Lemon's lawyer, Abby Lowell, made it clear what this was about. He said, look, this is a First Amendment fight. His whole argument was that Lemon was doing precisely what the Constitution is supposed to protect, shining a light on things to keep powerful people in check.
And it wasn't just his legal team saying this. You had groups like the Freedom of the Press Foundation, with guys like Seth Stern calling this a warning shot. The message they saw was pretty chilling. Hey journalists, you better watch your step because we're watching you.
And this image, wow, it really drives home the point that this kind of tension is nothing new. The push and pull between reporters trying to document a protest and law enforcement trying to control it, that's been a battleground for free speech for a long, long time.
And then things got political. The official White House social media account posted, "When life gives you lemons," and they even added a chain emoji. I mean, wow. For a lot of people, that post completely changed the game. It wasn't just a legal dispute anymore. It felt like the government was publicly gloating about arresting a journalist.
So this all brings us to a much bigger and maybe more troubling question. What does this mean for the future of journalism?
Dr. Stacy Patton brought up a really fascinating point. She asked, did the fact that Don Lemon is now an independent journalist make him an easier target? Think about it. When he was at CNN, he had this massive corporation behind him. But now, Dr. Patton argues there's this kind of two-tier system. You have journalists backed by big institutions, and then you have everyone else who's protected by, well, nothing but the First Amendment.
And the risks out there are no joke. The data is pretty shocking. In just the 1 year after George Floyd's death, journalists covering protests were assaulted, on average, almost twice a day. And here's the kicker. Over 85% of those assaults weren't from protesters. They were allegedly from law enforcement.
So all of this leads to what experts call a chilling effect. The idea is that maybe the government doesn't even need a conviction to win. The real goal could just be compliance. Making other reporters hesitate, making them think twice before they head out to cover the next big protest. In a way, just going through the arrest and the legal process, that's the punishment.
And that leaves us with this huge, critical question for our time. In this new world of independent media, with more and more reporters working for themselves, who gets to draw that line? Who decides if the person holding a camera is a journalist or a target? How we answer that question is pretty much going to define what freedom of the press looks like in America.